Ruth.
Okay, so to get us started, we have two amazing presenters here today. I'm going to introduce Dan Lowson. So, Dan Lowson is the Senior Director for the Education Team at the National Center for Youth Law and contributes to the organization's efforts in the area of education on behalf of all students, especially children of color and others that have historically been discriminated against. Dan came to the National Center for Youth Law with over 23 years of experience as a civil rights lawyer and education researcher, as the director of the Center for Civil Rights Remedies at UCLA's Civil Rights Program. Dan is the author of several books and award winning reports addressing the racially disparate impact of education policies. And he's regarded as a national expert on topics of special education, school discipline, accountability for graduation rates of students of color, and has testified about racial inequities before the United Nations, the US Congress, the National Academies of Science, and the US Commission on Civil and Human Rights. Dan has also served as an adjunct professor at Harvard Law School and was a public school teacher for 10 years before entering law school. So that's Dan, and I pass to you, Ruth.
Great to have you here. And presenting along with Dan is Ramon T. Flores, who works as a consultant with the National Center for Youth Law. And he was previously a graduate student researcher at the Center for Civil Rights Remedies, an initiative of the Civil Rights Project at UCLA. His work focuses on identifying and remedying disparities in school discipline with a particular focus on Latinx students. Through his research, Ramon aims to inform and change policy so that educational opportunities and outcomes improve and are optimal for historically marginalized young people. Ramon earned his BA in psychology from Pitzer College and an MA in psychological research from California State University, Long Beach. And he's currently a PhD candidate in education with a focus on human development and psychology at UCLA. We're so grateful for you both to spend time learning here, and we'll reinforce this several times during the session. But Dan and Ramon are totally open to meeting with any of your teams offline to spend more time on the web tool. So this is kind of a first look at this, and we're really excited to have you both. Take it away.
Thank you so much. It's a real privilege and honor to be able to work with all of you in California. And I should also mention we also provide support for any of you who are, filing complaints or litigating. And just recently, we filed a declaration, both Raymond and I, as experts in a case against the California Department of Ed. So, about their failure to address racial disparities in school discipline. Um, so let's go to the next slide. I think Ramon has the controls here. Um, the web tool that we created was really inspired by our ongoing work in California districts with all of you and includes looking at the data on school discipline, looking at many different types, but also looking at trend lines that go back 8 years. There's six data points because we skip over two of the years where schools were either fully closed or partially closed due to COVID. Every racial and ethnic group is included in, and there's a trend line for each one of them, as well as students with disabilities. And for the last 2 years, we've also been able to track youth in the foster system and youth experiencing homelessness. The tool helps advocates to compare districts or to compare groups within the same district, but also to compare to state averages. So you get a sense of not only how is your district changing on these different metrics, but also how does that compare to what's going on at this, statewide. And if there's a similar district you wanted to compare to, or you wanted to show, let's say you're going to a school board meeting that, say, Los Angeles or some other district was doing much better than your district, as a way, as another point of, leverage to say that these changes, improvements are possible. And the web tool is designed, and it's really, the product of Ramon's great and incredible work over several years now. And but it has downloadable graphs, Also, all the data in the web tool can be downloaded into an Excel spreadsheet, and we'll walk you through how to do all that as well. I see someone else is looking to get admitted. Um, anyhow, so over to you. Let's go to the next slide. I think this I hand it over to you, Raymond. Why don't you walk us through what you'll see in a minute, the different
Yeah.
tabs.
Hi, everyone. So the web tool, and probably many of you have already accessed it and interacted and used it. But there's pretty much just a ton of information in there. But hopefully it's organized enough where you're able to, navigate through it effectively. But there's a lot of tabs in the web tool that provide very useful information for districts here in California, for all districts in California. So one of the tabs, which is primarily the code book, it includes definitions of key terms, but also formulas for how we calculate rates. So we'll be talking about different types of rates today, but they essentially represent the discipline outcome per 100 students. Another one of the tabs includes total suspensions. So these are the count of suspensions that are being meted out to students. This may include students that are suspended multiple times, but all their suspensions are counted into this particular metric of suspensions per 100 students.
And they're in and out of school suspensions.
Yes, they include both of those. The next tab, which is tab 3, it provides breakdowns for the suspension rates by type of offense. So this may include, weapons possession, also like drug-related offenses, violence, no injury, which we also renamed as misconduct, no injury, because it includes profanity and vulgarity in that offense category. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Another tab also gets at lost instruction due to out-of-school suspensions. So this does not include in-school suspensions, it's just out-of-school suspensions. But this gets at also the immediate harm that's done on students' learning loss. These rates are, we want to say this data is buried by the California Department of Education in their data sets. It's kind of hard to find them. And also they don't calculate these type of rates as well. So that's also a strength and uniqueness of the rates that we're calculating in this web tool. We also provide the rate of student expulsion. And this was actually a recommendation or suggestion by another advocacy group that we include in the web tool. And lastly, and I think Dan talked a little bit about this, one of the strengths of the web tool is that you can go ahead and print either one chart or multiple charts for you to have handy, or also tables that we provide in the last tab, which is tab 6. And we also provide a link there to an Excel file that includes all this data that's in the web tool, including the raw data in one Excel file.
And I think it's still the ball is still in your court because you're going to walk us through. I could do this one and you could do the next one. How about that? So this is a look at the first tab that has data in it. The overview is really the first tab that has the definitions and formulas. This tab shows you on the left, far left trend lines, and we're only showing some of the data, but the nice thing about the web tool is you can choose whether you're looking at one racial group or you can choose them all, but it can get kind of busy if you choose too many. So here in the first statewide panel, we are showing you African American suspensions per 100. So that's in and out of school suspensions per 100. And the bottom line is for all students. And you can see there's a big difference. But then Kern High, which is one of the highest suspending districts in California for African American students, and you can see how much higher that is, and the The gray line below it is the white rate of suspensions per 100. And you can also visually see whether the gap is narrowing, or in this case, it was widening for many years. It got very wide in 23, 24, and it sort of stayed, even though rates for African Americans came down, it's still very, very wide. It may have narrowed slightly, and we there are other places where we can you can calculate, just subtract the bottom rate from the top rate, and that gives you what we call the racial gap. Now, contrast that with Merced Union High, which is a district, and we've interviewed the superintendent and several of the educators there because they were featured in our report that we published called In Harm's Way, and that we'll have a whole series of reports coming out this year with the newest data. But in that report, we found that they had legitimately and dramatically reduced their suspension rates for the groups that were most frequently suspended and significantly narrowed, although there's still quite a large racial gap. Um, and really, any racial gap is too large, but some would naturally occur by chance if, there's no racism, but that would also mean whites would sometimes be the highest group. So, and we rarely ever see that. Then on the bottom, we've shown these are statewide, and then for each district, the 2 years worth of data on students in the foster system and students who are experiencing homelessness. And these rates are typically much higher than in general, for any racial group. And we have also, and we'll be coming out with this year, in the In Harm's Way report, we describe what these rates are for further broken down by racial and ethnic groups. Okay, back over to you, Raymond.
Yeah, cool. Really quick, Dan. A cool function because I highlighted here in the
Yeah,
screenshot
sure.
about the web tools. You can hover over these different points in the trend charts, but also in the bar chart, and it'll give you a little bit more information regarding what that data mean, and also the raw data that goes into those calculations as well.
And so let's go. I think that we're going to do Hollister, and then Salinas, and then San Bernardino City District, and then Antelope Valley. So I think you're up first, or am I doing? You're up first, I
I'm up
believe.
first, yeah, with Hollister
We
um,
worked this out,
in
right?
San Benito. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm navigating a few things
Yeah, so
here.
now we're going to the actual web tool so
Yeah,
that
Oh,
take your
we're
time,
going live.
Ramon. And I'll just share as Ramon is pulling up that we connected with a few of our organizing partners because we thought it would be really great during this learning session if we highlighted the districts that some of you all are working in. So our partners from Youth Alliance asked for Hollister to be uplifted. And as we have time later in the session, everyone can ask questions, but especially for our partners where we're highlighting your districts, feel free to also lift up, what have been some of your main concerns in your area.
let me go ahead and drop the web tool link as well in the chat.
And by the way, some of you have already seen this because through FSD and other platforms and communications, the Education Civil Rights Alliance, for example, we've already made note that the most recent data is now populating the web tool. So we did a webinar on this same web tool last year, and we're always looking, just as we added expulsion rates, we're always looking for new ways to improve it. And so your feedback, even, you know, hopefully you find it useful, but if you don't, let us know what you found to be frustrating about it. And, no ego here. We are here to really serve your interests. So don't hesitate to reach out or to let other folks at FSD know if there's something that you really were hoping to see and weren't able to see.
Oh,
So I
One
think
quick question in the chat before you all start. Isabel is asking, you're drilling down to the district level. Can you also pull up by schools? That's a question.
so. Not in this web tool. There are a lot of ways that California suppresses data down to the school level, and it also the magnitude of information that we'd have to pack into this would be really high. We'll try to figure out a way to do that in the future because I know that is very helpful. Um, but not currently. You can, a lot of we're using data that is publicly available, but as we'll tell you more at the end, because I don't want to get bogged down in the technicalities, there are some differences in the rates that we calculate that are almost identical to what you'll find on, say, DataQuest. But there are some important differences, and things like rates of lost instruction you won't find anywhere posted in on any California website except for here.
thanks for that, Dan. So I'll go ahead and start off with Hollister. And, we had some conversations with Ruth in terms of some of the districts that we like to highlight in this live session. And I guess walk you through how we use the tool in hopefully an effective manner. But here in Hollister, if we're looking at the total suspensions, which includes out of school and in school suspensions, if we were to look at Black and white students in this particular district, we can see that there's been a pretty sharp decrease in the total suspension rate for Black students in 17-18. And it's gone down. But in 23-24, there was an uptick there, followed by a decrease in 24-25. There's also been, pretty low, I would say, mediocre kind of rates throughout the years for white students as well. This is represented by this gray line here. So there's not much of a racial gap that's happening in Hollister. However, we do want to note that when we're looking at the statewide average, which is this black line here, you'll see that the suspension rate for all students in 24-25 is 4.7 suspensions per 100 students. So although there's not much of a racial gap happening in Hollister here, these rates for Black students and white students have still been comparable to the total suspension average statewide. So that may bring up some concern, and maybe it may warrant like a deeper look into what's happening at the school level.
Exactly.
Here on the right side, we also place Hollister here, and this is a cool functionality about the web tool is we set it up where you can compare two different districts, looking at the trends, but also if you just want to kind of parse out some of the student groups in each of these sections and have the same district, you can also do that. And this is what we do here. We separated out the students with disabilities into this chart and also the all student rate.
And the foster youth and the youth experiencing homelessness, we don't have them in the trend lines yet because there's only 2 years worth of data that we have at the district level for those two groups. But in, future versions, we may, and we also wanted to highlight those two groups because typically their rates are much higher than any other groups.
Yeah. Also, if we add really quick Latinx students here into the charts, we can see that they mirror the rates for white students in this district. And I think in Hollister, there's a pretty sizable Latinx population in this district here.
And they are above the average for all kids statewide. So there's still a problem with excessive use of suspensions.
Yeah, I think what also popped out to us was this trend line for students with disabilities that's been consistently high throughout the different academic years here as compared to the district, to the statewide average for total suspensions per 100 students. We can see in 24-25, they have a sizable enrollment number for students with disabilities. Here, the rate is 11.78 suspensions that are meted out per 100 students, compared to the statewide average for all students, which is 4.7.
And later we can come back to this district, but I think we should jump to
Selena?
Salinas now and the tab of suspensions by the offense category, and we can talk about that. But just so you know, we did look at all the other tabs for every each one of the districts we're featuring today. So we're just picking out what we thought was, um, the most noticeable tab or tabs. A couple of them will cover more than one tab, but for that one it wasn't as disturbing. There's
Mhm.
something probably disturbing the closer you look, the more you know, and then there's always the possibility that the district didn't report accurate data. So, we a healthy bit of skepticism is something that's also something we
Mhm.
recommend. So if
I
you
know.
know, that more kids were expelled, for example, but they're not showing up, it might be that they were listed as disciplinary transfers instead of expulsions. And there's a huge problem with unreported, off the book suspensions. It's a national problem, but it's also that's quite clear in California. So,
And I just wanted to lift up that our wonderful partners at BHC, Building Healthy Communities, Monterey County, asked for this district to be lifted up. But yeah, thanks. And then one thing to point out that Ramon was showing, you're seeing Ramon like select the tabs right now, but one important thing is you'll see is that you need to select the county for your district because there's a few districts that actually have the same name but are different counties. But just as Ramon's doing, you all can play with this later and reach out to Dan and Ramon with any questions. Okay, go for it.
yeah, thank you. So here we noticed one of the more sort of the thing that jumped out the most around Salinas Union High District was when we looked at the misconduct, no injury category. And I don't know if I'm dating myself, but many of you may have played whack-a-mole at an amusement park. And we all know that the category that you see under District 2, this is both same district, Salinas Union High, but we've broken out in the first panel. The first panel is statewide. The second for misconduct, no injury, which is the most common now that disruption defines has almost been eliminated. It should have been eliminated entirely. And in fact, you'll see on the last panel we have disruption defiance and violence with injury. And you'll note that for disruption defiance, it's zero, it's pretty much zero for all groups. And yes, it is zero for all groups, including groups that have historically been the most likely to be suspended in that category. But what you see is a corresponding as this was eliminated K-12, which would have included all the high schools, and this is a high school district. What you see is that there has been an increase for African Americans and a widening in the most recent year of the racial difference. And these rates, now it's the same scale as the statewide average, but the rate for African American is above the statewide average and it's well above within the district the rate of suspensions for this category. And we have argued that this is a real problem of misinformation by California Department of Ed because they had to make a choice in how to report the different kinds of offenses, and they decided to lump in with violence, no injury, the category of obscenity. And we worked with the California Department of Civil Rights investigating school districts. I can't say the name, but we know where we were able to see all the offense codes broken down individually and not lumped together, that at least in this one very high suspending district, and I think others too that where I've worked as a consultant, we know that obscenity is one of the largest reasons, the most frequent reasons that students are suspended, including kids who are, experiencing homelessness. So literally kicking kids to the curb because of an F-bomb. And because it is, I think, probably taken over and maybe even worse than before when it was disruption defiance, which is very subjective and also another sort of mild reason, not a severe offense, not a good reason to be kicking kids out of school, and that's why they've banned it for all grades. We think the same thing, same argument could be made for several of the offense categories that you're still allowed to suspend students for, but the public won't see that if you don't break it out further. And so we not only, changed the name to misconduct, no injury to more accurately reflect everything that's covered, but also would encourage folks to, think about ways to get CDE to change this. We don't lobby, so we can't really go into details on how, but you all know what to do with this kind of information. And I think it does misinform local discussions when people think that all the categories now are about violence. Because the two main ones are violence with and violence without injury. There's some others, carrying a weapon, and we have all of them. You can find all of them. We've just featured the three, the disruption defiance because of, for obvious reasons. And you'll see that violence with injury is also seen an uptick. So it's very likely that as they've eliminated disruption defiance, that, the biggest and the highest rates are now for this violence, no injury, but they could be miscategorizing things as having an injury associated with it. It's very unclear since you also don't that's also a conglomerate category. That's not one of the state's codes. So I'll go kick it back over to you, Raymond, to talk about San Bernardino. And what's our hard stop time?
11 a.m. But do you want me to give you a heads up when we're at like 10:45 so you can
Yes,
try to
yeah, and
wrap?
we
And
want to make
okay,
sure
I'll
there's
give
time
you.
for questions
And
because
this is from our great partners from COPE. This is one of the districts they work in and monitor congregations organizing for prophetic engagement. Okay.
and at the end, if there's time, we can plug in any district that folks on this webinar want to see, including going back to any of these. So over to
Yes,
you, Raymond.
yeah, sounds good. So along those lines, I think what Dan was discussing in San Bernardino City Unified, we're noticing a similar trend here when we're looking at the total suspension rate broken down by offense category. We see also, I want to point out in our harm's way report at the state level, but also for many districts, we see the largest racial gaps occurring here in this offense category, this conglomerate offense category of misconduct, no injury. And I think looks pretty apparent in looking at the trend lines for both Black students and white students in this particular district of San Bernardino City Unified. And there's a potential whack-a-mole issue that may be occurring in this district as well for both these racial ethnic groups. We see in disruption defiance, they've been, diminishing pretty much to zero in the newest year, 24-25. But there's been a bit of an uptick for misconduct, no injury here for Black students.
And there's another category for this district, you were going to show students expelled, right?
Yeah. Choose them. So as I mentioned before, this is one of the data points that an advocacy group suggested that we add to this web tool here. And we can see here in the student expulsion rates, especially for Black students, that there's been an uptick over the previous year from 23-24 over to 24-25. This increase in the expulsion rate for San Bernardino City Unified. And there's a clear racial gap also between Black students and white students in this particular district.
I should also mention, at the beginning in our static files, we pointed out that there had been improvements at Merced Union High, but they had a fairly high expulsion rate, and we almost didn't feature them. But we did because the racial difference was narrowing, and notice that the scale has changed. So the numbers that were, when we get to expulsion, many districts, when you open this up, will appear to be zero. And this is one of those areas where if you see zeros, I wouldn't just take that at face value in case they're using transfers or other ways to coerce students to leave. Or the other that we can't capture here is the problem of disenrollment, but we can address that at a later point. And so let's go to lost instruction. And yeah. And for lost instruction is a rate that you won't see in DataQuest. You won't see it on the school district, the school accountability dashboard that they use for discipline rates and other accountability measures, where you see the color codes. And we'll talk about that at the end. But there is a problem with the color coding. I'll just briefly say right now, while we're setting this up, that the color coding is extremely distracting, and we've noticed that, for example, one of the highest suspending districts in California for Black students was Mojave. Uh, um, is it Mojave Unified?
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes.
think you said
And
grade two.
and the Black students there are among the highest, top five in the state of California. They got a color code of yellow just because of a small, or it could have even been sizable, but they're still way up there in terms of their suspension rate. And they use a different calculus. It's a unduplicated count of suspensions. We can talk about that more at the end. The point is that they're coded yellow, but white students with a much lower rate in the same district were coded as orange. So the Black students there were had a 23, more than one out of every five Black students were suspended, and white students with a less than half of that, 9.6 suspension rate, were coded orange. Um, so, so that would suggest that the white rate was more problematic somehow, even though it was less than half, or it was, yeah, half or less of what the Black rate was. So that's very, very disturbing because unfortunately, CDE doesn't pay any attention to racial differences or the size of the disparities or whether they're widening or not. So here we see Antelope Valley. We've taken the data that you can download in the chronic absenteeism file, and that's the count of days lost, and it's strictly due to out-of-school suspensions. And that's also true when you look below for kids in the foster system and kids experiencing homelessness. And you see how high those rates are. And those rates can be over 100 because they're counts of days lost due to out of school suspensions. They're not including expulsions. So these are only out of school and not in school suspensions. And you can see the impact on instructional time in Antelope Valley High, which is again also one of the highest suspending districts in California for Black students. And the racial gap has been widening for several years now and steadily increasing for the highest suspended group, Antelope Valley Union High, which is Black students. Um, and so there's a huge problem here, but it's not clear that the state is, you know, paying any attention to it. So this is, really very, disturbing. And there's also, a whack-a-mole problem. If you were to look, we don't really have to do it again. Oh, okay. That was fast. But in terms of this, when you break down the suspensions per offense, and again, now we've moved off of the actual days of loss instruction and looked at, but you can see that as disruption, actually, it's not a whack-a-mole problem. This is one of the districts where, on its face, um, there's evidence that they are violating Title VI, which says if you have a policy or a practice that is totally unjustified. And in this case, continuing to allow your principals to suspend students for disruption defiance despite the K-12 ban that was in place this entire year, that's a huge problem. These are unlawful suspensions. They should be zero for everybody. But instead, in the last year, they have increased to around 8%, 8 suspensions per 100 for this category when it should be zero. And it's also the racial gap. They did go down slightly for white students, but it's widening the racial gap and contributing to the racial disparities and and the lost instructional time, which you just saw. So this is, you know, one that may be ripe for filing a complaint or litigation, because on its face, what reason could they possibly have for allowing their principals to kick kids out of school for a banned for a form of conduct for which the school is not allowed to kick kids out of school? Um, and so this is, among the most disturbing findings that you can see. So I'll kick it back to you, Ramon, for cover anything that we haven't yet and look at the last tab is actually quite useful. Even there's a lot of information and there's no graphs on this one, but every just about everything here you'll find in one of the former tabs. But there are a couple things that are in addition, um, as well as you can see the different rates stacked on top of each other for each racial group. So over to you.
Yeah, and I think Alma had
Oh,
a
there's
hand
a
raised.
question that,
Yeah,
yeah,
there is a question.
what's
Yeah,
the
just
question?
posting a question and could be answered now or later, but I see a trend between the data and actually the policies that are in place. A lot of this is violation of policy, and I guess my curiosity and question here, we're finding out districts haven't updated their policies for the last 10 years. So to me, it's a big gap on why data. It looks like that, obviously, because there's not enough accountability on districts to operate policies in a way that addresses the things on suspensions and expulsions, right? The other part, I don't know if this system has it in place. Can we track how many suspensions are actually coming from that classroom? It is a big increment of teachers has the power to suspend. And it seems like the district level, but we keep getting this message the teacher can suspend students. So it's not necessary that we
Mhm.
have allies and things like that. And it seems like it's administrator. No, it's the teacher that is allowed to do that in classrooms. So we're seeing an increment where the admin said, like, we can't do anything if the teacher wants to do it. So also that's trackable in the system.
Not in the system, but I mean, I totally agree. This is a huge problem in California, and another whack-a-mole concern is that, and this is something, this group has been grappling with for as long as, at least since 2011 when I first started working with all of you, and which is that teachers are allowed to suspend kids from their individual classrooms. Um, and that's not recorded as an in-school suspension unless they're being suspended from more than one classroom. So your English teacher could say, maybe it meets 3 times a week and say, no, Johnny can't be in my classroom for these, 3 times, but it's not going to be, he won't hear, or if it, yeah, basically it's not going to be counted. And those data are kept, though. So through public records requests, advocates should be able to see them, but one of the things that might arise is if the numbers are lower and they might throw up obstacles like we can't give that out because of the risk of disclosing personally identifiable information. So there will be a battle for advocates, but depends on the district. You might be able to get that information to show that they're sort of covering up and and continuing to suspend kids and find ways to get around the limitations that have been passed by the state legislature. So, um, Raymond, you want to walk us through what we can see here?
Yeah, sure. So this last tab, the data tables tab, contains all these other rates from these other different tabs consolidated into one data table. And in this tab here, it's also interactive where you can include or exclude, certain student groups of interest or also the different suspension offense categories if you don't want them in there. So for example, here, like, for, what is it, Kern High, if I just want to look at like, black and white students in that district there, I can go ahead and deselect those. But also there's, particular outcomes that you want to include or exclude. You can also do that. So if I want just violence injury, misconduct no injury, disruption defiance, I can take these other ones out. And it goes ahead and automatically does that for you. So if you want to see everything in totality, the data tables I think is very useful for it. It's kind of hard to navigate, I would say, because you have to scroll. There's a ton of information for a lot of academic years. So you'll have to scroll to the right to see all that, unless you have like kind of a big screen where you can project this. It comes out pretty, a little clearer.
How do you do that scrolling again? I always struggle with it. So,
There's just a scroll bar here at the bottom. You just
oh,
go
I
ahead
see.
and,
Okay.
yeah.
That's
And
my problem.
yeah, and team, when we were prepping for this, we were talking about like, let's say you were printing some of the charts and you also wanted these tables if you're going to meet with a board member, right? Or in a coalition that you could decide if you're printing these, like, okay, do you want to highlight, do you want to visually see 21 to, 24, but just to know that that you'd make some choices, in terms of how this can be printed.
Oh, and
Yeah.
there's one other, I want to just, Ramona, if you can explain about the suspensions, the unduplicated counts of suspensions. I see you didn't check it off yet, but that's a new rate that's only available in this table, but it's most likely to correspond to what you would see on the California dashboard, not on DataQuest. Well, there might be a way to get to it on DataQuest. There's a place where you can look at but this is just it's the in and out of school suspensions, but they're unduplicated. So there's no reasons for any offense because a student suspended 5 times, 3 in school, 2 out of school would only show up once here. So it mutes the differences, it mutes the excessiveness, and then just briefly, California in their dashboard and in DataQuest uses a different enrollment baseline called the cumulative. It's not the typical, when you go and ask for enrollment data, that's what we use. It's called the census enrollment. And it's the same for the Office for Civil Rights for the U.S. Department of Education. Civil rights enforcement agencies typically use the census enrollment. And yet, for reasons that were unclear to me many years ago, um, the California Department of Ed went with cumulative enrollment. And there's some arguments, we won't get into the nitty-gritty, but I'm happy to walk folks through that. But you should know
So
that a school district might say to you, oh, rates are a little different than what we have. Oftentimes they come out the same, or very similar, but there might be some differences, and that might be the reason why.
yeah, thank you for that. Then so we do include that metric in here, which is the student suspended unduplicated rate. And I think for the most part, it might also coincide with what you find in DataQuest, which is the California Department of Ed's like dashboard that they've created, but also the California School Accountability Dashboard as well.
Yeah, right. That's the
Um,
one that links to the color codes, and those color codes link to the local control LCAP plans. But
Yeah, so our rates are a little different because we use census enrollment, which is the enrollment captured in the beginning of the year, I think during October.
yes,
But they use cumulative enrollment, which is to calculate their suspension rates, which is at the end of the academic year. So this may include students that are, attending a school or a district that
for just
um, for a
one day.
day or a week. Um, so especially for highly mobile populations, like students in the foster system or those that are experiencing homelessness, this might, deflate the rates drastically for them.
Or if a student is being threatened with a suspension and they drop out, they would be reflected still in the cumulative enrollment, but they might not make it into the October census count. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So
and there's
yeah,
more ways that a district could sort of play with their enrollment numbers to game the system so that it's harder to check,
like
to cross check.
yeah,
And just
and
a heads up that we passed 10:45 a few minutes ago. So if you all want to share a couple final points, and so we have some
mhm.
time for questions from the team, that would be great. Anything else you want to make sure to share, Ramon? And
Oh yes, show where they can download the whole
yeah,
enchilada.
great.
Yeah. So there's kind of two icons where you can download, one from the dashboard. So there's this icon here to download. You just go ahead and click it, and I think you can download into. You can either download like one of the graphics or one of the tables or the whole complete thing into like PowerPoint or if you want like a PDF or an image. But also here at the bottom in this tab, you can download the Excel file that contains all this information in one spreadsheet.
That's especially for statewide advocates, or if you're working as an advocate or an educator in more than one district and you want to compare, let's say, 10 districts or see which are the worst for Native Americans, which we only left out just to, as examples, we are using groups that have higher population numbers. But remember, we can look at every racial and ethnic group, and same is true in all this data that you can download.
I think also there was a comment, Dan, I don't know if you see it in the chat
Yeah.
by Reina. Would there be an
And
interest in
and
holding?
Diane, yeah. So I thought folks could, if folks had shared something in the chat, we'd love to hear from you verbally now, if you're still with us.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Raina, and I'm with Building Healthy Communities in Kern County. We're part of the Kern Education Justice Collaborative, and we heard that suspensions and expulsions are very high in Kern County for our Black students, and so we would love to see if there's any interest in maybe holding a media briefing, virtual or in person, or a press conference, just to kind of give light to this. Um, and the study and also this data set that you guys created. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. We supported a prior lawsuit
Oh yeah.
brought by Neighborhood Legal Services. Were you part of that lawsuit?
Yeah, we were part of it with the KEJC. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah. So we were the experts on that. And we are available to support folks who want to do litigation, and we could, appear as experts. Um, and I am not located in California, but Raymond is. So there's possibilities, depending on, yeah. So there's a lot that we can provide to support your ongoing efforts there. I know from that case that there was some pushback on the methods, and one of the things in the Kern County Office of Ed is they had a virtual school which had a lot of students in it, but no suspensions or very low numbers that sort of lowered their numbers that we had excluded from the analysis because you can't kick a kid out of school if they don't actually attend in person. And then the other thing is they have the alternative school run by the juvenile justice
Mhm.
system, which has a lot of kids coming in who may only be there for a week or two, but they're counted for the purposes of calculating these rates as if they were there all year. So in some of the schools where we did do a school level analysis in that case, um, some of those enrollment numbers were 300% higher, so three times the census enrollment data. So if there were 100 Black students reported under your normal enrollment, and that daily average attendance may have been less, is usually less than that. But the cumulative enrollment might have been 300 Black students because it included, all these students that were enrolled for just a day or a week. And especially for a day or two, it's virtually impossible to suspend a student because they're not going to be there the next day to to get suspended. And so there's a concern that, the threat of suspension can lead to kids leaving the district. And especially with the county office of ed, where they go, between, say, maybe Kern High and the county office of ed program, they're changing districts when they do that. And so there's ways of gaming the data that I think are going on there.
Yeah,
But we're
so
more than happy to continue to help.
yeah. Yeah, please go for it, Alma. And then I think Diane had to leave, but after Alma, I'll share Diane's chat because I think it's important too about some of the struggles of accurately monitoring data. Go for it, Alma.
Yeah, your comment then on the, suspensions could lead to leave the district. That's totally correct. However, I feel like districts are being very strategic to build alternative ed within their own district. So it's another way of push out. And I would
Yeah.
love to see the comparison of traditional schools with alternative ed schools, because our district, Salinas Union Heights, was a perfect example. We have three different alternative eds within the district, and involuntary transfer or pushing parents to transferring them really kind of set the tone of what schools, the way they're covering themselves with push out. That is like for them is not push, and we're giving you a school that works for you for your working model. So something I'm really interested to explore more, and how data could unpack a little bit more on, like, it's really push up and criminalization of our students through an alternative that is not giving them the quality education they deserve.
Yeah, and to your earlier point, when you do disaggregate data further by school, that is more likely that you'll be able to see that kind of a pattern, especially so in some cases, like in Kern, with the Kern County Office of Ed running some of the alternative programs, they're leaving Kern High to go to the County Office of Ed district, and that creates a huge problem with in terms of tracking students and being able to say who's to blame, basically. But when the alternative schools are run by the district, we share your concerns, and one of the things that we've worked with Atasi before to look at some of the alternative school suspension rates. And in prior reports and in future ones, we will try to look at some of the larger alternative schools. Um, but that's a good point, and we'll figure out. We'd be happy to talk with you further to figure out how best to get at that. Whether it's a separate report, um, it's hard to get, again, all the data on individual schools into a web tool like this without it becoming just way too much and overwhelming. And you can get the data through DataQuest, and knowing that, and you can, all the data that we have here, you can find on the California Department of Ed's websites. So we can help any district. If you were trying to do a deeper dive into school levels, we can work with you to help you develop, the ability. None of the formulas we use are complicated, so it's all dividing the count of students, the counts of suspensions, the counts of days of lost instruction, whatever it is that we're counting, divided by their enrollment, and that gives you the rate, and multiplied by 100 to give you a comparable rate. And so we can also provide training directly to advocates in how to use some of the same techniques to look at school level information, um, so that it's over time all of you will develop more the capability to really to hold districts accountable.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And any other questions from anyone online? Well, this was a great session, and I would also add, because we know we're working with BHC Monterey County on a community ed defense project, and sometimes these transfers will get coded as voluntary, depending, like Alma said, about if the family's convinced, like, oh, this is a better match for you, or we could be suspending you, but because there's also a credit issue. So some of the work our team did with Cadre when there was a huge issue of illegal suspensions in LAUSD is we worked with parent activists and families to actually get individual student attendance reports, because we had students just like, families getting robo attendance calls because they were in the office all day and they weren't in any of their classrooms. And so I think some of this is a match between data and, kind of needing to support sharing of individual family stories and records, because like Dan and Ramon are sharing, there's a lot of really important information here. And we know also that a lot kind of gets made invisible depending on the strategies that a district is using. So yeah, maybe a future learning session is some PRA requests and asking for records, because that's been a really powerful matchup in some of our monitoring work with Cadre. So just to close out, thank you, Dan and Ramon. Claps all around.
Thank you
I
all.
shared Dan and Ramon's emails for everyone here. We'll send this recording out. But thank you again, Dan and Ramon, for being willing to meet up with any of our FSD members who would like to just do, some analysis work with you all and check out their districts. So just really appreciate the session and all that was shared.